Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Please take a moment to click that like button, to subscribe to our broadcast, and to click on the bell icon if you'd like to get reminders when our new episodes drop.
So, if you're new to this channel, each week, Todd, Leonard, and I stop for a moment, take a moment, and have a conversation, a brief conversation about the upcoming weekend's gospel lectionary reading. We try to have that conversation in the context of societal justice, love, and inclusion. Our hope is that our conversation will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we say during this time together that it might inspire you alongside with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, I know you're going to be gone next week. There's not going to be a recording, a program next week. We've decided to skip a week in the gospel lectionary reading. What passage are we looking at tonight?
Yeah, so this centers us into the first weekend of Lent. It is the first Lenten Sundays reading, which is Mark chapter 1, verses 9 through 15.
So yeah, so this is we've looked at part of this passage already this year, a
Mm-hmm.
little bit the last part of the passage, but it's actually we've looked at a lot of these themes in the last 3 or 4 months. So this would be review for a lot of us. It starts off with Jesus leaving Nazareth and traveling into the Judean area to the Jordan, where John was baptizing and getting baptized. The heavens tear open, the Spirit descends, and then you have the voice from heaven. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like you said, we talked some about the baptism back on the baptism weekend. But this is, it's I think in your writings this week you talk about how while scholars are not complete in agreement about this, either Jesus chose initially to become John's disciple, or he resonated with what John was doing and believed that it was in harmony with what he wanted to do. And so he chose to work with that movement, even though he wasn't necessarily submitting to the discipleship of John, but he was recognizing the validity of John's message and what John was calling people to do. So he and John are very much in alignment on what the priorities are, um, and and so I think that's what we see there initially is whether the scriptures and different gospels tie a tighter connection between John and Jesus. Mark doesn't give all that initial pre-birth narrative that talks about how Jesus and John are related, but um, there's clearly a resonance between the two as Jesus begins his ministry.
Yeah, for the Gospel of Mark to make such a hard connection here at the beginning of his gospel with Jesus and John the Baptist, this would have spoken volumes to the original audience as to how we are to understand Jesus. And we know that John, and it's a signal to us even today too. We know, to the best of our knowledge from historical sources, that John went around preaching a message of not how to get to heaven, but it was a Jewish renewal movement of returning to the justice teachings of the Torah, calling his society to justice, speaking out against oppression and especially, of Roman soldiers and the greed of his day and the temple establishment and the complicity there with Rome. And he was gaining such a following that Herod, Josephus tells us that Herod was actually threatened by John, and that's why he had him executed. And that's the historical side of it. I know each gospel gives a little bit of a different motivation for Herod's execution of John, but Josephus tells us it's because Herod felt threatened of John's teachings and the following that he was gaining. Anybody with that many people could, cause problems very quickly. But John was a very much here and now, reformer talking about a more just way of living today, and not that pie in the sky, assurance of eternal life stuff. And so that's the signal to me that the Gospels connect Jesus so firmly with John, that gives us a hint into how we're to the context in which to understand Jesus' teachings. We don't see Jesus either going around the countryside trying to get people to say a special prayer, like a sinner's prayer, so they can go to heaven when they die. We see Jesus calling out the establishment. We see Jesus healing people from the concrete things they're suffering today, delivering people from the concrete things they're captive to today. He's liberating the oppressors in the here and now. So I think that hard connection with John, it was a signal to the original audience, and it should be to us too, but especially to the original audience. Oh, this is the context in which we're to understand Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And along with that, John the Baptist was speaking against, when he's speaking against Roman occupation, he's also speaking against the corrupted religion of the priestly class and of the other Jewish leaders, teachers of the time, and so he's, again, if Mark or any of the gospel writers wanted to signal that Jesus was more closely aligned with a certain rabbi or a certain priest or something like that, they would have done the same thing. And so the fact that they went with a hard uh, reformer in John and saying, no, Jesus most aligns with him, says a lot about then what Jesus is going to be doing in his work.
That's right. And John was definitely an outsider. He was on the periphery of the system. He
Right.
was a voice from the
Absolutely.
margins. So yeah, that's how. And two, I like too, Todd, here how this language and when I first stumbled onto this in Isaiah, it made things click for me. The heavens are being torn open. The Spirit is descending like a dove. And Isaiah 64, that rending the heavens, tearing the heavens open, that language, all of the language here is from two different sections of Isaiah. But in
Mm.
Isaiah 64, it says, "Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains would tremble before you, as when fire sets twigs ablaze and causes water to boil. Come down to make your name known to your enemies and cause the nations to quake before you." This was a people that was longing to be delivered from foreign imperial oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then to connect it too with Isaiah 42, which is that language, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I'll put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. In faithfulness, he will bring forth justice till he establishes justice on the earth." There's this rending of the heavens. The enemies are going to tremble. And this is my beloved one who's going to establish justice on the earth. Again, it's this justice focus and this here and now liberation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the ties are intentional. Again, it's so much of what I've heard in traditional fundamentalist Christian discussions is it's like, look how Jesus fulfills the prophecies of the Old Testament as Messiah, and no, what you should actually be looking at is saying, look how Jesus and the early interpreters of the ministry of Jesus, like Mark, are tying Jesus' ministry into the prophetic tradition of
Mm-hmm.
prophets like Isaiah, and saying that they see him as a fulfillment of those things,
Standing in that
not
tradition.
as not as a magic person, but as a deliverer, as a reformer, as someone who's bringing justice.
Yeah, yeah. He's standing in that Hebrew prophetic justice tradition
Mm-hmm.
for sure. So then it says, and this is kind of cool. Once the Spirit sent him out, and remember, to the best of our understanding, Mark is the earliest gospel that was written. There's not the details about this that are in Matthew or Luke; those come much later. But it says, once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, at once, sorry, the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness for 40 days. The number 40 is significant within the Hebrew tradition. It's all over the place. Being tempted by Satan, he was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. Now, for us today, I think we totally miss what Mark's hinting at here. But when
Hmm.
he says he's there for 40 days, he's in the wilderness, he's being tempted by the Satan, and he's with the wild animals, the
Hmm.
beasts. Um, and the angels are attending him. These are references not to the Hebrew prophets like Isaiah, but more to the apocalyptic prophetic literature in the
Hmm.
Hebrew tradition that
Hmm.
was very, very much percolating among the Jewish people leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem, or shortly away from it. When Mark's gospel was written, there's this identification here, and these wild animals. It's a reference really to Daniel chapter 7, and most scholars agree with this, where God's people is being torn apart by these wild animals who represent foreign imperial oppressors,
Hmm.
these
Hmm.
empires. And uh and then there's going to come this son of man attended with the angels, to face these wild animals,
Hmm.
and the kingdom is taken away from them and given to him. And then so many, I mean, I should have prepared some slides for tonight, but so many scholars out there see how the book of Daniel being kind of like that Jewish protest literature of its
Hmm.
day,
Hmm.
it's resistance literature. You know what I mean? It's uh it's edgy. It's yeah, it's resistance literature. Out of all the Old Testament books, the book of Daniel is the only book in the Hebrew scriptures that every chapter of Daniel is quoted from somewhere in Mark.
Wow.
Like, Mark felt passionately about Daniel, and he's always subtly, making these threads through this Jesus
Hmm.
story, connecting Jesus back to the liberation stories of the book of Daniel. And this is one of those many threads. When we see Jesus with the wild angels, or the wild animals being attended to by the angels in the wilderness, the original Jewish audience would have said, "Oh yeah, that's Daniel 7. That's the book of
Hmm.
Daniel,"
Hmm.
which is fascinating. One, and I'm trying to pick up this one here. It says, "The Apocalyptic Imagination." This is by Horsley. His book, Jesus and Spiritual and the Spiral of Violence: Popular Jewish Resistance in Roman Palestine. Page 144. He says emperors were not divine. The apocalyptic imagination thus had a strengthening effect on people's ability to endure, and even a motivating effect toward resistance and revolt. So that's how people were reading the book of Daniel during the time in which Mark was written. It was revolt, resistance literature. And the fact that Mark is tying Jesus in with John, this justice prophet, and then he
Hmm.
uses the language from Isaiah saying he's going to
Hmm.
establish justice on the earth, and then he weaves in Jesus's temptations with the liberation from unjust imperial powers in the book of Daniel. There's a
Right.
lot going on here that we just totally don't see today.
Right. Along with that, I mean, is and for those, and to the extent that the Jewish audience in Mark's day would pick up on this, I don't know. But when Daniel is prophecy written around uh, Judea and Babylon. Babylon is the oppressor, and then the subsequent oppressors of Medo-Persia um, and countries like that. But then we also know that Daniel was written much later, and was written during the time of the Maccabean uh,
Revolt. It was
revolt. And
Maccabean
so
revolt literature.
So it's tying into both that. That's, it was written, Daniel was written to encourage the Jewish people during the Maccabean period by retelling the story of the Babylonian period, and now Mark is picking up Daniel and saying, now let's keep taking this language and this literature and applying it to the Roman Empire period.
Absolutely. So it just keeps building on itself with this common theme of when God will intervene and put all injustice, all violence, and all oppression to right.
Mm.
And that's what the people were longing for in Jesus's day. And Jesus's ministry is connected to that. There are so many more references. I list a whole bunch of scholars and how they make this connection with Mark and Daniel in my blog this week at renewedheartministries.com. So I want to recommend everybody go take a look at that on Friday if you're wanting some more references for that. I should have made slides out of these quotes, but I didn't. So go to renewedheartministries.com on Friday and they'll all be there in the article. Looking to see what. Oh, yeah. And then John gets imprisoned. That's the big bombshell.
Mm.
So Jesus is in the wilderness. He's with these wild animals and he's being attended to by the angels. That's Daniel 7, 13 and 14. And then, boom, John's in prison. John gets arrested. Now it gets real. You've gotten the attention of the powers that be. And I've said this before, but people don't get arrested for handing out tickets to heaven. Oppressors would much rather people be preaching about the afterlife than the injustices they're committing in this life. And so John gets arrested. He's a threat. And this is where we see Jesus kind of pull off and start his own mission.
In the spirit of John the Baptist, but now he is, whether he intended to be part of John's movement initially or not, the reality is now he's the leader. He has become the face of this work of reformation and justice.
That's right. And it's not like he takes over John's ministry. He starts his own. And so you have two sets of disciples now. You have John's disciples and Jesus's disciples. And in Christian history, there's some friction between those two groups for a while.
For sure. Yeah.
So let me see what else I've got this week, Todd.
I was just going to comment on your thing about nobody gets arrested for selling tickets to heaven. It's just interesting to me when I watch snippets of evangelical preachers preach about how they are now standing against empire.
Oh, please.
By teaching personal piety and their understanding of sexual morality and their understanding of who goes to heaven and who doesn't, that they're the ones being persecuted. They try to take on the mantle of people like John the Baptist or Jesus as a revolutionary. But again, what they're trying to get back to is reasserting their power in being the arbiters of who goes to heaven and hell, rather than being the ones working for justice and liberation in the here and now. It's just clearly, it has to be heard clearly that what they're doing is they are actually reinforcing status quo empire behavior by not challenging the status quo and instead saying that they are the ones being persecuted, when instead it is those who are being currently threatened and persecuted by empire. Those are the ones who need the message of Jesus that we're talking about. The message of liberation.
Some people will accuse me, and what I'm about to say in resonance with that, as oversimplifying things, and I'll say yeah, absolutely. Reality is much more complex than many of our statements, communicate. But but large sectors of Christianity today have become just a tool in the hands of corporate greed. And they're doing it for self serving purpose. There's a trade off here because they desire political power in order to legislate their definition of morality
Mm-hmm.
on the public masses, either
Mm-hmm.
voluntarily or involuntarily, doesn't matter. They're going to legislate their definition of morality. And so they are supporting a certain political party who has promised them that. And we saw
Mm-hmm.
that in the last 2 years with the historic removal of women's rights to bodily autonomy. But then the political party that honestly what they're doing is they think they're accomplishing that, but in the bigger scale they're just tools in the hands of a party that favors corporate greed and
Right.
corporate, you know what I mean, and corporate
Right.
advancement, tax cuts to the richest one, the wealthiest 1%, give them power. I mean, it's the Christian bloc, the Christian voting bloc right now that's putting into power those who always push for a society that, at least economically, definitely is capitalist, but it looks nothing like the economic teachings of Jesus. And so, yeah, they get to have a power that legislates their definition of morality, but that's not the definition that's not how Jesus ever defined
No.
morality. And
No.
those who they're being used by to put into power are creating economically a society that looks nothing like their Jesus's economic teachings. So it's just messed up from the core.
Mm-hmm. Because yeah, there is no discussion about economic justice. There's no discussion about greed, about corruption, um, about some of these the core global issues of racism and um, and exclusion of certain minority groups and things like that. There's no conversation about any of that. In fact, they say that is antithetical or at best much less important than the gospel of a ticket to heaven. And they're willing to let the world continue to spin out of control in this economic greed and an abuse of the working class and abuse of minorities. That all we're supposed to do is go to those oppressed people and give them a ticket to heaven, and that's our responsibility to them. It's not to change the power structure at all.
Yeah, right now here in West Virginia, I live in Appalachia. Right here in West Virginia, we um we are in our legislative session. It's the first 2 months of every year, and there's huge. These are the folks that Christians in my state have put into power. They have legislation right now that's being pushed to be voted on for children to be, or no, for parents or for teachers. Sorry, for teachers to be required to out any LGBT student that they know of who's in the closet in their classroom. They need to report that to the Board of Education, who in turn will be required to report that to their parents. There's also a bill on the floor right now for anti women's rights and wanting to take away the exemptions for rape and molestation, which you've ever been to West Virginia, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much. I mean, I sit on multiple boards for child advocacy in this state, and the levels of child abuse here are unbelievable. But then you've also got a bill right now too on economics where they're trying to tie the SNAP benefits, food stamps, food security.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Mm-hmm.
food desert. Many counties in this state that are food deserts, and
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to connect SNAP benefits to either being You have to either be in training for a job or be, working at a job. You have to have some type of plan towards employment in order to get your SNAP benefits. And for crying out loud, the only person that's really serving are the people that make money by having employees that have that need employees in order to exploit that labor so they can continue getting wealthier. And I mean, that's who's really using this at the top, is let's tighten the screws so people can't even eat unless they're working for somebody. You know what I mean? And it's and that total disregard for the fact that some people have disabilities, where it's our responsibility as a society to make sure we take care of them.
That's right.
And and again, the people that put, I mean, I wish you could see from, just drive down the countryside here where I live. These are the people in power right now that have been put there by the Christian communities in my area.
Yeah.
Those are the ones the Christians vote for. Unbelievable.
Fundamentally misunderstand the gospel of Jesus completely.
Yeah. So John gets arrested. Jesus embarks on his mission, starts preaching the gospels. I have a great statement that I do want to share this week. This is from Ched Myers, Binding the Strong Man. And it's talking about the gospel. Roman propaganda, and those of you who've watched this channel, we've already discussed how the gospel was a Roman imperial term, not a religious term. But Roman propaganda focused on eulogizing Caesar as the divine man. The ideological strategy is well documented in coins of the period, and of course, in the later emperor cults of Asia Minor. The ascension to power of a new ruler was cause for glad tidings. Does that sound familiar? And celebrations and sacrifices always followed. Deification of the emperor gives euangelion, and that's Rome's gospel, its significance and power. Because the emperor is more than a common man, his ordinances are glad messages, and his commands are sacred writings. He proclaims euangelia, that means gospel or glad tidings, through his appearance. And this first euangelium is the news of his birth. As one ancient inscription puts it, the birth of the God was for the world, the beginning of the joyful messages which have got forth because of him. That's Binding the Strong Man, page 123. Once again, it just shows that Jesus embarking on his mission of preaching the gospel of the kingdom, that was in direct opposition to the Roman Empire, who was preaching its gospel of the Pax Romana. So if you add up everything we've talked about tonight, if you add up that the first thing to happen in this passage is Jesus comes and he's associated with John. And John was he was a justice prophet. He was standing in that prophetic justice tradition, and he was becoming a threat to the powers that be. And then you see Jesus be baptized, and the language of Isaiah tied to his baptism of the heavens being rent. And this declaration that this is the one that my beloved, and the establishment of justice. And then you see Jesus going into the wilderness to fight Daniel's wild animals and to be attended to by the angels. And then John gets in prison, and Jesus then launches out preaching his gospel, not of Rome, but of the alternative to Rome, the kingdom and just world of God. This is actually a really cool passage that should encourage us in our justice work today. I mean, we still have oppression, injustice, and violence in our world like they did back then. And what was Jesus' solution? What was this kingdom? What was the gospel that Jesus was teaching? What was the gospel really all about? And that's I'm asking that rhetorically. That's where I think there's the greatest intrinsic value for our justice work today, is when we begin to understand what it was that Jesus was actually teaching in his kingdom gospel, what the kingdom looks like. there's a lot of good stuff in there that could solve our problems too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's again, it's another justice focused passage, another justice focused week.
What a surprise.
Yeah. I mean, it's marked. It's not John.
So, no, it's Mark. It's
It's
Mark.
marked.
So, hey, so this has been a big week for you. Why don't you talk a little bit about what happened this week?
Oh man, I'm so excited. So we have Finding Jesus second edition is out through Choir Publishing. It hit #1 new release on Amazon
Woohoo!
yesterday, and it's still there today as of this recording. And I'm just so thankful to Choir Publishing. Want to make a shout out to Keith Giles, who wrote the foreword to my book and has been very helpful in getting it published through them, and also to my launch team. Everyone on my launch team, you included, Todd, who left a review and made today a success. It's just been the last 24 hours have been a whirlwind, but they've been a huge successful whirlwind. And to land as #1 new release in on Amazon, that's really cool. And I couldn't be more thankful to all of the folks that band together to make that happen. So to everyone who participated in this, thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you haven't had a chance yet, check it out. Herb Montgomery, Finding Jesus, a fundamentalist preacher, discovers the socio-political and economic teachings of the Gospels. It's available now on Amazon.
All right. And then, as you know, you can find everything else that Herb produces on his website, renewedheartministries.com. We hope you all have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you not next week, but in 2 weeks. So we wish you the best and meaningful start to Lent, and we'll look forward to jumping back into the stories of Jesus in the Lenten season when we return in 2 weeks.
Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Have a good night.